Hello everyone, welcome once again to an edition of Under the Macroscope, Skybound Capital's weekly catch-up on various macro issues affecting the globe. And today it's a great joy to welcome back Skybound Capital's Chief Investment Officer based in the Hong Kong office, but he's been vacillating between Hong Kong and mainland China, Theodore Xu. Theo, great to have you back on Under the Macroscope. And something that's been dominating the headlines over the past week and all over the globe is flooding. So I'd just like to get your take on what is going on, the effects on the approach that governments are taking to climate change, which is clearly a massive factor here, and how that affects investment decisions, investment opportunities, particularly in the ESG space. Now, that's a whole lot of topics to cover, but let's start with the flooding itself. It's not restricted to any particular area. We've seen large parts of the Northern Hemisphere in particular affected.
Oh, totally. Thanks, Matt. I'm very happy to be back here and great to talk to all of our audience here. Let's start with the floods, as you rightly point out. I don't want to personally associate this with climate change as yet. We might need more scientific proof, but I am very inclined to believe it is highly related to climate change. And if I take a step back, when I was growing up, I familiarized myself, and actually not just me or all my friends, with two Spanish words, El Nino and La Nina. And those two words became the most prominent climate effects that we have seen in our life. And back then, I thought that was that period. But unfortunately, it seems that period lasts to today, and it probably will continue to the future. And the floods that you mentioned are devastating news to the families who lost lives and to everyone who suffered economic losses over this as well. If we look at Western Germany, within 2 days, from 14th July to 15th July, it had rainfall of over 4 inches in 2 days, which was a volume of an average 3 months on a normal year, right? And then just in the past 2 days, in Henan province in China, we saw rainfall of 8 inches within 1 hour. So that was like 10, 20 times of what Germany just had. And however, I don't want to just feature these floods. In fact, we are seeing more and more or more frequent extreme weather everywhere. Many of you probably still remember just early this year in the extreme winter, power price in Texas went up 100 times, right? And then during the summer, we are seeing extreme heat in many places as well. So I guess this is something that we need to live with. We need to be mindful of. And more importantly, I think all of us are responsible for protecting ourselves. Let's leave aside the investment or saving the world for later. But first and foremost, you need to have the skills and you need to do something to be responsible for protecting yourself. And the best part of this is that we know it is achievable. Again, let me use China as an example. Beijing was famous for its smog back in like 10 years ago. Somehow people can no longer see. Like you can't see the car 10 meters away at all during winter. It was awful. Many multinational corporations were moving their expats out of China, out of Beijing for health hazard reason, which was never seen before. And the very popular measure people use to gauge the air pollution is called PM 2.5, which is a measure of particles in the air. So now let me give you the statistics. PM 2.5 declined by more than 50% in the past decade in Beijing, thanks to all the efforts people put into environment protection. I'm not saying Beijing is perfect now. No, it's still far from being perfect. It still suffers from some smogs every winter. However, the average days of smog came down from 55 to 60 a year 10 years ago to roughly 5 to 6 days a year now. So that is still a visible change. And it's not just an achievement of Beijing. We saw that with London 50 years ago. We saw that with Los Angeles 30 years ago. So my point is, it is totally achievable. Let's try to do something to save ourselves.
So Theo, what you're saying is that there is a measure of responsibility, a large measure of responsibility that lies with us. It obviously needs some government intervention, but how do we go about it? I guess one of the most frightening things about the flooding of the last couple of weeks, I mean, you mentioned Germany in particular, is the speed with which it happened. I mean, when you experience extreme weather events, they are often of such a nature that you can see them coming, that you can prepare. Now, if we take Germany as an example, and you look at the unfortunate death toll there was clearly an element of the unexpected and a lack of preparation. So how do we change behavior?
I think one is a psychological preparation or a mental preparation. Again, as you said, what caught people off guard is something unexpected. And this is exactly why we keep stressing on climate change. I'm not saying climate change is 100% of my life, but I think people do need to be mindful of that. And it does potentially have a direct impact on each one of us individually. And therefore, I think that is the preparation every one of us needs to have. But back to your point on government intervention, for sure, there's much that government can do, in addition to the education that I was talking about. Even infrastructure, particularly infrastructure, I would say. It is true that you can never build an abode that is 100% fireproof. There's always some ways that you can destroy things anyway. But it is about how you can be better prepared, even for the events we never experienced before. Because back to the example of Germany or the floods in China today, the weather specialists are telling us these events has a probability of taking place only 1 out of 1,000 years, or even 1 out of 10,000 years. But you know what? Unfortunately, we're seeing this every now and then. So maybe we should just step out of those stats or probabilities and just prepare ourselves physically too. So back to the physical preparation, I think evacuation programs or how you build things more solid, obviously, is one way of doing it. But at the same time, all the rescue plans, in financial services, for example, we always talk about a backup plan, a contingency plan. I think nowadays, even as a natural person, as an individual, as an average Joe on the street, you need to have a contingency plan for yourself too. And this is also something that the government can help. So let me give you 2 real-life examples of short-term opportunities or investment opportunities that we locate out of these natural disasters. Many people got stuck in a tube subway in China, more than 500 people actually. They were almost dead. The majority of them were saved, rescued. But as you can imagine, when floods or some of the natural disasters take place, the worst nightmare is not that someone is going to die soon, but that you don't even know there's someone who's going to die. because communications can be cut off. And that's exactly what we have seen with Germany, with a part of US, and with China in this case. We all know the mobile carriers, they rely on the base stations, right? They build base stations around you. This is how your cell phone get connected to the network. But what if the power to the base station is cut off? What if the base station itself is knocked down by the flood? It no longer works. So one opportunity that we have seen, particularly this time in China, is the use of drones. And I'm not talking about the GoPro type of camera use drones. I'm talking military use drones. And so in China, what happens is some of the mobile carriers actually put a mobile base station and mount it onto a drone, fly the drone to the flooded area to provide signal to everyone in that area so that they can report to the authority where they are, what kind of situation they are in, what kind of help they need, how urgent the help is needed. And at the same time, they can report to their family, to their loved ones, to make sure that people are no longer too concerned. Those drones can stay in the air for only a few hours, but of course you can replace them. So this is the first time actually I have seen it being put into use. I personally have seen it being tested many times in the past as a plan of first aid rescue. But this circles back to our discussion on how government needs to prepare for these things. They need to run fire drills every now and then regularly, regardless of the probability of something actually taking place, simply because you never know. And as I said, I have seen these drones taking off and landing all the time without achieving anything real. But now when they are in need, they are in practice, they are in use. And that is saving a lot of lives. So that's one example. The other example is probably more down to us, to our daily life. Many of us use social media. You tweet from every now and then. You Facebook your friends. You WhatsApp your friends. But in an emergency, let's assume the drone is overhead. So we have the signals, we have the reception. But then you still need to make sure your message is delivered most efficiently with the widest spread that people can take note of this. So I want to feature one particular company that our South African friends will be very familiar with, which is Tencent. So Tencent has this instant messaging app called WeChat, which is very popular in China, more than billions of users. And within the program, they also have mini apps embedded in there. And during natural disasters, particularly nowadays, we find it extremely helpful with those productivity tools or apps within the chat groups. So what happens is someone put up a spreadsheet, literally a spreadsheet, where hundreds of people can be inputting simultaneously. So on one column, you will see all the needs, all the help needed. On the second column, you will see, okay, I volunteered to go save John. And with these teamwork tools, it's really tech company in use. So this is really a very good example, and we are going to see more and more of those. So in addition to the day-to-day entertainment and communication needs that we have or we use on all these apps, we are finding better use of them in a natural disaster. So those are just two real-life examples, but quickly, I think in the medium term, many countries, many governments can also think of spending a lot more on IT infrastructure in general, as I said, how you build a network, etc. In the US, you are seeing many private companies compete to build satellite or near orbit satellite to provide internet access, etc. I'm not suggesting that is the best route to do this, but what I'm suggesting is, yes, we do need more ways of getting connected to someone, because that's how you improve efficiency in general. And the other case is, again, very relevant to our day-to-day business, financial services. I talked about contingency plan. Many companies nowadays are having things or data or systems on the cloud. But cloud is not virtual. Ultimately, cloud is also physical. It is somewhere in one hard disk in the data center. It's just not in your office anymore. And again, what happens if that data center is flooded? And that's exactly something that we have already seen, not just this week, the past week, but quite a few occasions this year when a whole data center was on fire, a data center is in flood, there's no power anymore, you can no longer access your data, although you know they're on the cloud. Actually, you probably don't know that even. As I said, the cloud itself is destroyed. So I think more and more companies need to think of spending a sufficient amount of resources on IT infrastructure. And you need to think out of the box beyond your normal comfort zone, thinking, okay, I'm relying on Microsoft or Amazon, and that should be solid enough. But you know what? You may still need a plan C. And that's a big opportunity that we see for all these hardware companies, or as I said, data centers, all the IT infrastructure. They will continue to be a magnet for more capital for all rounds. And I also mentioned infrastructure. So traditionally, the building materials, cement, machinery needed, telecom, you will see a surge, at least a short-term surge in demand for all these, particularly in areas that are most affected by these natural disasters today.
Well, Theo, it's an old saying that within every crisis lies enormous opportunity. As sad as the toll might be in the short term, it's how one responds and prepares for other eventualities. Fascinating discussion, and we are running out of time, sadly, but it would not be complete, a conversation with you, without just getting a picture. Certainly based here in South Africa, where I'm sitting now, our consumption of media tends to be quite US, UK, Europe focused, to some extent Australia and New Zealand. And I just have to get a picture from you of the COVID situation in China. Just in the last few hours, news from Australia and New Zealand of the Trans-Tasman travel corridor being closed due to COVID cases. And there seems to be a lot of panic still in a lot of the countries where we get the majority of our information from. So a quick update, where is China with regard to COVID?
COVID is a very novel word to me, because we don't even hear about it very often nowadays in China. It doesn't occupy news headlines. And I guess similar to media elsewhere, it's probably more focused on domestic issues rather than international issues. And I think most of Chinese are taking COVID as a given, that, okay, we know there's COVID cases in Australia, there's COVID cases in US, in South Africa, but that doesn't affect our day-to-day lives, because we don't hear about COVID even in our friends or in where we live. For example, I'm currently physically in Shanghai, a city home to 30 million people. There have been no homegrown new cases for the past 1.5 years. So maybe the last case that we actually saw in Shanghai was about February, March last year. And that was it. And that was not just applicable to one city. This is what we see across the country. Of course, there are still new cases every now and then in different places. And back to the case, example of Shanghai, there are on average 2 or 3 new cases from the passengers who are coming into China or flying into China every day. But they are all well taken care of. And the people on the ground are living their normal lives. They can easily dine out to wherever they like. You can go to movies. You can hang out with friends. There's no restriction. There's no social distance. People are not mandatorily required to be wearing masks all the time, although you definitely are strongly suggested. If it happens that you go on public transport, then it is almost mandatory. But I think people are taking this very easily now. They believe it is part of their lives. And when it comes to economy, I think it's also very evident if you compare like how COVID has impacted China with how COVID has impacted the other countries. By then, you will understand why I was saying that Chinese are no longer taking this as something in our day-to-day lives, because the dip in economic development was really in March last year, and that was a dip. It wasn't as big a pullback like a 10%, 20% pullback we saw in the States, in Western Europe. It was a tiny dip. And then right after that, China rebounded. Chinese economy rebounded. But then again, it wasn't like a V-shaped rebound you saw in the US, simply because it didn't dip down enough to start with. But that was really the impact on China. On a day-to-day basis, people are continuing their lives as usual. I think the only big downside is that people can no longer travel abroad. And I have met so many friends who are dying to go abroad, to travel, to continue travel. But with that said, we actually have personal friends who are willing to be quarantined for weeks, if not months, so that they can go to the US. So we still have people who are like spending holidays abroad despite all the COVID cases, simply because they know they can come back to normal after the quarantine. I guess that's very reassuring for them.
Yeah, it's extraordinary just observing the different approaches and the different outcomes of those approaches. And as always, great to get a different perspective firsthand from where you are situated in the world. Theodore Xu, Chief Investment Officer of Skybound Capital, thanks as always. We look forward to having you on the podcast in the not too distant future once again to get your perspectives on various different topics. You can download the podcast at Skybound Capital's website at www.skyboundcapital.com. You can subscribe there, also on Apple, Spotify, and on the Google podcast platform for Android. And until next time on Under the Macroscope, have a great week, everyone.